All right, we're doing up another Game Boy Advance, an IPS original GBA. This one I'm doing up for my coworker. He's like, "Hey, do me up a Zelda themed GBA. I'll pay you for your time. I'll pay you for the price of the GBA that you're going to use to do the mod, and obviously I'll pay for the price of all the parts." So, yeah, I'm getting paid to do this, I guess, which is great. These are fun to do. I love doing them anyways, to be honest. As far as the Zelda theme goes, he originally wanted to get a shell like this. This was a limited edition UV print. I think Retro 6 or one of those companies did it. And as you can imagine, they sold pretty quickly. And again, it's a limited run. So can't really get those anymore. But we're going to go with a clear green case, as you can see, with all the yellow buttons. And in here, we've got the screen itself, of course, an IPS. I guess it's the Funny Playing V2. It's the same one that I've used before. As you can see, the shell looks pretty decent. It's got the button contacts, or the battery contacts in there already. And they do include a sticker for the back to make it look a little more legit. But yeah, fit and finish and overall impression on this shell seems pretty decent. This isn't one of the most expensive shells, but probably not one of the cheapest ones either, so it's kind of just the middle of the road as far as the price of this one went. This is the GBA that we're going to be using for the mod. This is an extra one that I had lying around with the intention that it would probably one day be used for a mod. So we're going to give it a quick test. I noticed the power button on it is a little iffy, so that is something that we will clean. But it kind of does turn on and off without actually being clicked all the way off. Just if you wiggle it a little bit when it's in the on position, it does tend to turn off. So yeah, that's something that we'll have to look at. Hopefully we can fix that. Again, like I mentioned, we got all yellow buttons and I got yellow membranes. This was a set, so it came with the D-pad and the A and B buttons. But most importantly, the start and select. Those membranes are actually what you see. The membranes themselves are the buttons on the outside, so we want the yellow to match there, and they do match the rest of the buttons quite nicely. I don't think they came from the same company necessarily or manufacturer, but looks good. Here's a parts list of everything I got, if you're wondering. This is in USD. But yeah, this stuff's not cheap, especially if you're not buying it off AliExpress. I got it from a Canadian company, so it ships right from Canada. So again, this is the pink GBA that we've started with. Basically just going to disassemble it. And then we're going to swap the motherboard over quickly just to test the screen. You always want to test the screen and make sure that's working before you put it all together. All right, so we've tested the screen. I want to get the screen in pretty much right away, I think early on, and then focus on some of the soldering. So yeah, I'll just pop this screen protector in there, and then I'll keep the front sort of protective tape on there just while we're doing the work. This also means we're going to be peeling the protective cover off the LCD screen itself relatively quickly and dropping that in, but once it's in there, obviously it's going to be protected. The shell is basically already set up for the IPS screen, so again, we're going to peel that protective layer off. I'll be using that later on the back side of the screen as an insulator. Before we get to soldering, we do need to clean a few things using some alcohol. Like I said, we do need to clean that power switch. We're going to clean the contacts for all the buttons so that the buttons have a, nice response to them. And I'm going to clean the speaker just because it was really dirty, and you might be able to see that through the translucent shell a little bit. So we'll clean the speaker off, make sure it just looks nice. All right, we're going to fire up the soldering iron. I haven't used the soldering iron in a little while, so I'm going to kind of pre-tin the tip and clean that off on the wet sponge. Actually, it looks pretty good. So first things first, I'm just going to get solder on the pads for the left, right, and select buttons on the ribbon. The pads are there, but there's no solder pre-soldered to them, so you kind of got to do that yourself. And then we can solder the wires. It's 3 fine wires. Again, this is for start, sorry, not start. This is for select, left, and right, the L and R triggers. This is for adjusting the brightness. If you have no soldering skills, in theory, you don't have to do this. When you turn on this thing, it will start on like level, I don't know if it's like 5 out of 8 or something. It starts at a fair brightness level, but it's not the brightest, so you won't be able to adjust it up to the brightest or adjust it down to the lowest. So this is worth doing if you can solder. Again, it's 3 wires that get soldered to the ribbon, and then those go off to points on the motherboard. So I'm just adding a little extra solder to the points we're going to be soldering on the L and R. There's technically already solder there, but we're going to add a little more just so it flows a little bit better. And then there's a test point on the other side of the motherboard for the select button. I'm a little confused. Well, I've kind of figured it out by now, but I was a little confused as to how this ribbon folds over. I don't know if I've done the 32-pin connector version. So the Game Boy Advance has 2 major revisions of the motherboard in how the LCD connects. Some of them are 32-pin, some of them are a 32-pin connector, and some of them are a 40-pin connector. And this ribbon's been designed so that's going to work with both, but how it gets kind of aligned in there and adjusted and folded over is a little bit different. It took me a second to figure out how this all gets folded over so that the ribbon's in the right spot for the screen. So now I'm soldering the L and R points for the screen brightness. Again, I always get a little confused. Just remember, you're looking at the motherboard from the back side. So the left is actually going to be the right, and the right is actually going to be the left as to where you're soldering it on the board here. And then again, that final test point for select, and that should be it. Brightness should work. The brightness adjustment should work as we want. So just one final look at how that ribbon is folded over. It's going to look something like that while it's in the system. As you can see, I've used some of the extra tape from the screen, the 3M tape, to hold down these wires. I just want to make sure the wires don't get in the way of the cartridge slot, and also the near the L and R buttons, there's 2, you can see the copper pads with the hole in it, and that's where 2 screws from the shell are going to come through. And you just want to make sure these wires don't get in the way of where the plastic standoff for the shell is going to sit, and obviously where the screw comes through. So this is what it should look at this point. You need to sort of fold the motherboard out of the way, and you need to work on the front half because you got to get all the buttons and the membranes in before you can put this down, which means it's got to be all connected to the screen. But you can kind of fold it out of the way like this, put all your buttons and your membranes in, and then I'm going to put in this foam, I guess spacer you could call it, and that's going to keep some pressure on the back of the screen to keep the screen in place, but I'm not going to use that 3M double-sided tape thing. I don't want too much in there that puts too much pressure on the screen. I also don't want to permanently stick the screen in place. I don't like to do that. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video, though. Now here I am trying to fiddle with getting the side pieces and the L and R buttons in. No, don't bother. I've realized you can fold the motherboard over first. You only need to worry about the D-pad, the start and select. Don't forget the light pipe and all the buttons, and the power button, the power switch thingy, and the power slider, I should say. It slides on the switch. But you can now screw the motherboard down, get it tight. I like to put pressure on the motherboard as I'm screwing it in. You kind of have to fight the membranes here. It's because the membranes are going to want to push the motherboard away from the shell. But you can get the motherboard in place. Then you can put those final little side plastic pieces in and the L and R. Don't try and do that while the motherboard's out like I was trying to do. That just makes it way harder to get everything to fit in. So far, feels good. The membranes actually feel surprisingly good, so that's good. Now this is really what you do, is you get everything in place and the back goes on last. Now again, what I'll do is put like the bottom screw in first and then the top outer two screws in first. And I like to really squeeze that shell together as I'm tightening the screw. And then the screw itself doesn't have to force the halves together. You can just screw until it feels tight. You don't want to over tighten these screws. I've said it before with these shells. They're not pre-threaded. You're doing the threading right now. And it's very easy to over tighten these and strip the threading right out of the shell. And then the screw is never going to stay in the shell. So use your hand to force that shell shut as you're screwing it, as I'm doing here. And again, don't over tighten. Now here you can see I'm testing the power switch. It seems to be better. It's not turning off now when I wiggle it, so that's good. I think cleaning it has helped. Alright, so let's get this rear sticker on. Try and align that the best you can, but it kind of fits into its little spot, so you can kind of just line up the bottom. And yeah, that looks pretty good. I mean, you don't have to put this on. I'm actually surprised it comes with it. Yeah, here's a little peel for you. I'm going to give the screen one last little cleaning here. I've obviously got some fingerprints and stuff on there. I actually had the thing peeled off to line the screen cover into the shell. It was really hard to align it into the shell with that on there. So I kind of peeled it out of the way and then put it back on. So just one final cleaning on that screen. All right, so there we go. There's the Minish cap. Very fitting. Oh man, it looks great. Let me just lock in the auto exposure here and I'll show you the brightness working. So again, you got multiple levels of brightness. Holding down select and L and L goes down and R goes up, just like you would expect. Super easy to adjust the brightness on this thing. It doesn't have a lot of extra features like scan lines and, scaling options, but I kind of like that. It's super simple. It looks great. Super easy to adjust the brightness. Very quick to adjust the brightness. Here's this little slip cover I just bought. I figured I'm buying all this stuff for him, and he's paid me quite well, to be honest. So $10, I thought, you know what, I'll get him this, and I can try it, see how it fits, because I haven't tried these retro modding sleeves. Gotta say, thing fits like a glove. It seems to be shaped very specifically for the Game Boy Advance. And I thought I would see if on their website, if you picked a Game Boy Advance versus a Game Boy Color, if it was really just the same sleeve, and it's not. It's a slightly different shape, slightly different size. These are fit perfectly for the Game Boy Advance. I am very happy with the way this one turned out. In a few ways, I like it more than my own modded Game Boy Advance. For one, I like the shell better. I like the transparent green. I like the transparent shells in general because my shell is like a white plastic with a green coating on it, and it kind of has a bit of that rubberized feel to it. Kind of feels like a T-Series ThinkPad, if you know what I mean. And that, it looks nice and it feels nice, but it's a little hard to clean. And under heavy use, you are going to rub that coating off eventually, and you're going to see white plastic through it. There's, already some spots, if you look closely in the, in the cracks where the two halves come together, you can see the white plastic. When you open the battery compartment, you can see the white plastic. I like the idea of this, the transparent plastic, and you don't have to worry about, rubbing it off, rubbing the color off. And so, yeah, my coworker did say just get the same green shell that you have, that I have. And no, I said no, I would go with the transparent. I know that it's green plastic. It's not white plastic with a green coating on it. So I do like that. These membranes feel really good, and I'm really surprised at that because of how cheap they were. The D-pad is very responsive. You do not have to press hard in any direction. Unlike mine, where I have to press really hard, especially right, to get right to activate. Yeah, the buttons are super responsive. Brightness works. Everything works great. The volume's decent. No Game Boy Advance seems to get too loud. Some people will mod them with like an amplifier circuit that'll make the speaker louder. I think he's mostly going to play with headphones anyways, if I recall him saying so. But yeah, I really like these membranes, and the reason I'm surprised they feel so good is because they were cheap. This membrane set was the D-pad membrane, the B&A buttons, and the select and the start. And you want the select and the start because those are the membranes, the color of those membranes are what you're going to see on select and start. These are the rubber membranes. Unlike here where it's the plastic buttons, the membranes are underneath and you don't see them. So if the membranes didn't feel good, I was going to swap them with the stock as far as the D-pad and the B&A goes, and only use the membranes for the select and start. The thing is, this set, again, is the D-pad, the B&A, and the select and start, was cheaper than another company that sold just the start and select membrane. And theirs looks kind of faded, whereas this, the yellow is bang on. The yellow on this rubber pretty much matches the yellow on the plastic buttons and the plastic sides and L and R perfectly. So between the membranes and how the membranes worked out, again, they were the cheapest ones, cheaper for the set than it was just for start and select from another company, and yet it feels great. The D-pad's a little loose, which I kind of like, and again, very little effort is required, unlike the aftermarket D-pad membrane that's in mine. The D-pad is the type that floats on the membrane, so you can press the whole thing down at once. Maybe that's not ideal, but overall the looseness and the responsiveness I really like. And again, the buttons are super responsive. Fit and finish is really good. On this shell, the fit and finish on this shell turned out pretty good. And again, this was one of the cheaper shells. It wasn't like the quote-unquote premium or, you know... actually, I think it's a funny playing shell, now that I say that. So, it wasn't necessarily a cheap brand, but it was a cheaper shell. And the shell was only like $11, if I recall. I did put a price list at the beginning of the video, but I already forget. And it is one that says Nintendo. It doesn't say for Nintendo. Mine says for Nintendo, as mine came from, well, it's Retro Modding, but I think Retro 6 makes the shells. I get all these companies confused. There's all these different companies that make shells, and then when they sell them through different stores, sometimes they end up with different names. So it's like, you know, Handheld Legend calls them the Prestige shells or whatever, but I think those are really made by Retro 6, and they're a little, maybe because they're a little bit bigger, a little more legit of a brand, they don't push their luck with trademark stuff. So, you know, they say for Nintendo instead of just having Nintendo, as this one does. But yeah, the fit and finish on this shell is primo. Honestly, I think it's just as good. Honestly, maybe even better. My shell didn't come together quite as tightly as this did on the top. Now, I didn't use the sticky double-sided foam thing, the 3M sticky double-sided foam gasket, I guess you could call it, to stick the screen in. And I've done that on the, I think the first time I did a GBA, maybe the first two, I used that, and then one time I needed to take the screen out and it broke the screen. These screens are super delicate. When you are working with this screen, the screen is delicate. You're working with a ribbon, that's delicate. It's always a little nerve-wracking, and even on this one, I was shaking a little bit at times because I'm very nervous about breaking something, especially when I'm building this for somebody else. But yeah, I find if you stick that in, it makes the sandwich of everything a little bit thicker inside, which can be a little harder to get everything together. It can sometimes put pressure on the screen. You've got to be careful not to put pressure on the screen. You'll get a bright spot wherever there's something pressing on the screen. Also, you can break the screen very easily if you ever need to take it out of the shell. If you ever want to change the shell, or you need to, I don't know, clean the screen or something. It's very hard to not break the screen if you got it stuck in there and you got to pry it out of the shell. So my advice has always been, after I've done the first few of these, and then I did several more without it, and I can definitely say you don't want to use that. Just don't bother with it. The screen fits in there because this shell was meant for this screen. It aligns itself, and with that foam backing in there, which I do like to use because that will sort of separate the that'll separate the ribbon cable from the PCB. And then I use the when you peel the clear off the screen itself, not the screen protector, but that it's got like a rectangular clear piece that you can peel off there. You then use that on the back of the screen. It's there, you got it. It's basically garbage, but putting that on the back of the screen is a little insulation between the metal back of the screen and the ribbon cable. And then you got the foam between the ribbon cable and the PCB. So everything is insulated. Nothing's going to short out. Yeah, brightness, again, works great. All the buttons are super responsive. The shell fit and finish is great. It worked out pretty good. The power switch on this Game Boy Advance, this was the clear pink Game Boy Advance that it started as. The power switch was very finicky, and just touching it a little bit like this would cause the Game Boy to turn off, turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off. And so I did clean that with some alcohol and then worked it, and it seems a lot better now. So it seems to be a common thing with Game Boy Colors and Game Boy Advance. Probably SPs, I would imagine, but that switch can definitely get dirty, especially if it hasn't been used in a long time. It's been in the off position for years. It just seems like maybe some corrosion or something built up in there, and the alcohol and working the switch seems to have fixed that. This thing looks great. Got the sticker on the back there. Looks great. I love the green and yellow. I would love to have done a brown. I wanted to go yellow, green, and brown. I don't know if my coworker, I don't know if the person I did this for was 100% down with that idea, but I thought it would have looked great with a brown screen bezel, but couldn't find one. Very limited on, this is glass, and it's also got to be a little bit bigger to fit the slightly bigger IPS screen. And so very limited sometimes on what colors or designs you can get there. Again, initially my coworker wanted to do it Zelda themed using that shell showed at the beginning of the video, but that was like a limited run thing. It's very hard to find now. Sold out. The common places I buy stuff be Handheld Legend or Retro Modding. This time we went with Retro Modding because they had everything in stock and they ship out of Canada. So for me in Canada, that's a lot quicker than shipping from the States. And I also don't get dinged with duty sometimes when I'm importing stuff. So yeah, I will typically check both Handheld Legend and Retro Modding because sometimes one will have something in stock and the other won't. In this case, Retro Modding had everything I needed in stock. So one place, ships from Canada. But yeah, always check both. And, there's obviously, stores on AliExpress and some of those kind of sites that you can buy from. There's stores in the UK you can buy from. And sometimes, for example, a lot of these parts you can get off AliExpress. But, you know, I don't like to ship stuff from China. I just don't trust that it's going to arrive. There's more of a chance it gets lost in the mail going that distance. More of a chance it gets damaged. I don't know. I just like, if I can get it from a Canadian site, it's going to cost more, obviously. But the shipping only took a couple of days. I've mentioned that before. But anyways, yeah. This thing just turned out great. Oh, again, fit and finish and all the buttons and the shell and everything just kind of came out perfect, to be honest. So yeah, I am quite pleased with this one. And my coworker, who it is for, shall be quite pleased. He's a big Zelda fan, obviously. He wanted it to be a Zelda theme. And I'm pretty sure he's going to be playing the Minish Cap on there. And Fire Emblem and, you know, some of those Golden Sun. He's into RPGs a lot, so a lot of good RPGs on the Game Boy Advance. And, yeah, I guess that's it. See you guys later.